What if one of the biggest names in modern investing is quietly signaling that the future of finance could become far more digital than most people realize? And what if XRP is somehow connected to that transformation in ways the average investor still doesn't fully understand yet? That's exactly why conversations surrounding Cathie Wood, ARK Invest, and XRP have exploded all over social media recently. Because whenever Cathie would talk about disruptive technology, millions of investors immediately start paying attention. And honestly, there's a reason for that. Love her or hate her. Cathie Wood became one of the most recognized investors in the world because she consistently focused on technologies that most additional investors initially underestimated. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, digital assets, automation, genomics, fintech innovation. While many institutions stayed focused on old systems, Cathie would build her entire investing philosophy around one idea. The future belongs to disruptive innovation. Now, before we go any further, let's make something extremely important clear immediately, because the internet loves exaggerating everything for clicks. Cathie Wood has not officially confirmed some insane XRP to $1,000 tomorrow prediction. There's no verified interview where she guarantees XRP hits impossible numbers overnight. But what makes this conversation fascinating is the broader direction of ARK Invest's views on blockchain technology, digital assets, tokenization, and the future of financial infrastructure. Because once you really begin understanding what institutions are preparing for behind the scenes, you start realizing why XRP supporters believe Ripple may be positioned closer to the future of finance than most people currently understand. Now think about this carefully. For years, crypto was treated like a joke by traditional finance. Banks mocked it. Governments attacked it. Institutions avoided it publicly. Analysts called it worthless speculation. But now, the world looks completely different. The largest asset managers on earth are integrating crypto exposure. Governments are building digital asset regulations. Banks are developing blockchain settlement systems. Tokenization conversations are accelerating globally. Stable coins are becoming integrated into financial ecosystems. And artificial intelligence combined with blockchain infrastructure is beginning to reshape how institutions think about financial efficiency. That's not hype anymore. That's transformation. And Cathie Wood has consistently argued that blockchain technology could eventually become one of the biggest technological revolutions of the modern era. Now, this is where XRP supporters become extremely interested, because Ripple focused directly on institutional financial infrastructure long before most companies even understood where blockchain adoption might eventually go. Ripple focused on cross-border payments, liquidity movement, settlement efficiency, financial interoperability. Those are trillion-dollar institutional conversations, not meme culture. And supporters believe that if blockchain technology eventually becomes deeply integrated into global finance, systems connected to liquidity and settlement infrastructure could become enormously important. That's why XRP continues appearing in discussions surrounding the future of payments and tokenized finance. Now, let's talk about tokenization, because honestly, this may eventually become one of the biggest financial stories of the next decade. Most average people still don't fully understand how massive tokenization could become globally. Imagine stocks moving digitally on blockchain systems, real estate becoming tokenized, bonds settling faster globally, currencies interacting through programmable financial infrastructure, assets trading 24/7 digitally across borders. That's the future institutions are actively researching right now. And Cathie would repeatedly emphasize that blockchain technology could dramatically reduce friction and inefficiency inside financial systems. That's important, because Ripple built specifically around reducing inefficiencies in cross-border settlement and liquidity movement. Now again, balance matters. Cathie Wood did not publicly announce that XRP becomes the center of the financial universe. But many XRP investors believe ARK Invest's broader vision of digital finance indirectly supports the kind of future Ripple has been building toward for years. That's the key point. Now, here's another reason this conversation feels so emotional online. A lot of people genuinely believe we are entering one of the biggest financial transitions in modern history. You can feel it everywhere. Inflation pressures continue globally. Debt levels remain enormous. Traditional banking systems appear increasingly outdated in some areas. Governments are exploring CBDCs. Stablecoins are growing aggressively, and institutions are racing to modernize financial infrastructure before they fall behind technologically. That creates huge attention around blockchain ecosystems connected to institutional utility, especially XRP, because supporters believe Ripple focus on the exact areas institutions now suddenly care deeply about: settlement, liquidity, cross-border efficiency, financial interoperability. Now, another reason Cathie Wood's opinions matter so much is because she focuses heavily on exponential technological growth. And historically, exponential growth trends often look unrealistic early on. At the beginning of the internet era, most people underestimated online commerce. At the beginning of smartphones, many analysts underestimated mobile ecosystems. At the beginning of streaming, traditional media companies underestimated digital platforms. And now many investors believe traditional finance may still be underestimating blockchain infrastructure. That's why XRP theories remain so powerful emotionally, because supporters believe the market may still not fully understand the scale of transformation that could happen if tokenization and blockchain settlement systems expand globally. Now, obviously, critics raise important concerns too. Competition inside digital finance is intense. Stablecoins are growing rapidly. Governments may prioritize centralized digital currencies. Banks may build private blockchain systems instead of relying on public infrastructure. And regulations still remain a huge factor globally. Nobody knows exactly how the story ends. But one thing feels increasingly undeniable now. The institutional attitude toward blockchain technology has changed dramatically. That phase of total dismissal is over. Now the conversation revolves around implementation, regulation, tokenization, digital infrastructure, financial modernization. That's a completely different stage of industry evolution. Now, let's talk emotionally for a second because, honestly, this is why XRP communities remain so passionate despite volatility. A lot of people feel financially trapped today. Housing became expensive. Inflation reduced purchasing power. Debt exploded globally. Traditional savings feel weaker, and younger generations increasingly feel like traditional systems no longer create opportunity the way they once did. So naturally, when disruptive technologies emerge promising transformation, people become emotionally invested, not only because of profits, because of hope. Hope that they still have a chance to participate early in the next major technological revolution before institutions fully dominate it. That emotional energy fuels huge communities around XRP and blockchain infrastructure generally, because supporters believe Ripple position itself around the future rather than the past. Now, maybe XRP becomes major global infrastructure one day. Maybe competitors dominate instead. Maybe governments build entirely different systems. Nobody knows for certain. But what's becoming harder to ignore every year is this. The financial world is transforming rapidly. Digital infrastructure is expanding globally. Tokenization is accelerating. Institutions are integrating blockchain technology. And investors like Cathie would continue emphasizing that disruptive innovation may reshape finance far more dramatically than most people currently expect. That alone is enough to keep XRP at the center of some of the biggest conversations surrounding the future of global payments and digital finance today. Now, here's where this entire conversation starts becoming even more interesting. Because once you begin looking at how quickly institutional finance is moving toward digital systems, you realize why so many XRP investors believe Cathie Wood's broader vision of the future may align closely with what Ripple has been building toward for years. And honestly, this isn't just about crypto anymore. This is about the future structure of finance itself. Think about how fast the world is changing right now. Artificial intelligence is reshaping industries. Automation is replacing traditional workflows. Digital assets are entering institutional portfolios. Tokenization is becoming a serious conversation inside global finance. And governments worldwide are actively building frameworks around digital infrastructure. That's massive, because only a few years ago, most traditional institutions treated blockchain technology like a temporary trend. Now, many of those same institutions are racing to avoid being left behind. And Cathie Wood has consistently argued that disruptive technologies tend to grow exponentially once adoption reaches critical levels. That matters enormously, because exponential growth looks impossible in the early stages. At first, people laugh at the technology. Then institutions slowly begin experimenting. Then infrastructure develops quietly behind the scenes. Then adoption accelerates faster than expected. And eventually the world changes around systems most people originally underestimated completely. That pattern repeated throughout history. The internet, smartphones, streaming platforms, artificial intelligence, and now many investors believe blockchain infrastructure may follow a similar path inside finance. Now this is where XRP supporters become extremely optimistic, because Ripple didn't spend years focusing mainly on internet hype culture. Ripple focused on institutional infrastructure, cross-border liquidity, settlement systems, financial interoperability, payment modernization. Those are not small markets. Those are trillion-dollar systems connected directly to global finance. And supporters believe if blockchain adoption continues accelerating institutionally, Ripple may already be positioned closer to future implementation than most people realize. Now again, balance matters. This does not guarantee XRP dominates global finance. Competition remains enormous. Stablecoins are growing rapidly. Governments are building cbdc's. Banks are developing private blockchain networks. And regulations still create uncertainty globally. But one thing supporters constantly point out is this. Ripple spent years building relationships around institutional finance, while many crypto projects focused only on speculation. That distinction matters more today than ever before, because the industry itself appears to be maturing beyond pure speculation toward real infrastructure conversations. Now, let's talk more deeply about tokenization, because honestly, Cathie would repeatedly emphasize how transformative tokenization could eventually become for global markets. And most average investors still don't fully understand how massive this shift could potentially be. Imagine a world where stocks settle instantly, real estate becomes digitally tradable, bonds move through blockchain infrastructure, assets trade globally 24/7, liquidity flows faster between markets. That's not science fiction anymore. Major institutions are actively researching and investing into this future right now. Asset managers are exploring tokenized products. Banks are modernizing settlement systems. Governments are building digital finance frameworks. And financial infrastructure globally is evolving faster than many people realize. Now think about what happens if enormous amounts of value eventually move through tokenized ecosystems. Liquidity becomes incredibly important. Settlement efficiency becomes critical. Interoperability between systems becomes essential. That's exactly where XRP supporters believe Ripple's technology may eventually play a major role. Because Ripple focused specifically on liquidity movement and cross-border interoperability years before tokenization became mainstream. Now here's another reason Cathie Wood's views create so much attention inside crypto communities. Cathie Wood consistently talks about convergence between technologies, artificial intelligence, blockchain, fintech innovation, automation, digital ecosystems. And many XRP supporters believe blockchain infrastructure combined with tokenized finance could eventually reshape global markets more dramatically than most people currently expect, especially if traditional systems continue struggling with inefficiency and rising operational complexity. Now, let's talk emotionally for a second because honestly, this part matters more than many analysts admit publicly. A lot of younger investors today feel disconnected from traditional financial systems. Housing became harder to afford. Debt exploded globally. Inflation reduced purchasing power. Traditional savings feel weaker. And many people feel like giant institutions always position themselves early before average investors understand what's happening. That frustration creates huge emotional energy around disruptive technologies. Because people desperately want to believe they still have a chance to participate early in the next major transformation before it fully arrives. That emotional reality fuels huge XRP communities online. because supporters believe Ripple positioned itself around the future of financial infrastructure long before mainstream adoption happens. Now, another fascinating part of this conversation is how quickly institutional sentiment toward crypto changed. A few years ago, crypto is useless. Today, how do we regulate digital assets? How do we tokenize markets? How do we modernize settlement infrastructure? How do we integrate blockchain technology safely? That's an enormous shift. And honestly, the speed of this transformation surprised many people. Now, another major factor fueling XRP optimism recently is regulation. For years, regulatory uncertainty slowed institutional involvement in crypto markets. Large institutions hesitated because legal frameworks remained unclear. But governments globally are now building stablecoin rules, crypto legislation, and tokenization frameworks much more aggressively. That's critical, because institutions generally avoid deploying massive capital into legally uncertain environments. Clearer regulations could eventually accelerate adoption dramatically across parts of the digital asset industry. And XRP supporters believe Ripple may benefit if institutional blockchain adoption expands under clearer regulatory systems. Again, no guarantees, but enough possibility to keep investors deeply engaged. Now, let's address the biggest question directly. Could XRP eventually experience massive valuation growth if Ripple succeeds institutionally? Possibly. But nobody knows exactly how large that growth could realistically become. Anyone guaranteeing specific price targets is being dishonest. Markets are unpredictable. Technology evolves rapidly. Competition changes constantly. And financial systems rarely evolve exactly the way people expect. But what supporters argue is this. If blockchain infrastructure becomes deeply integrated into future finance, if tokenization expands globally, if digital settlement systems continue growing, then systems connected to liquidity and interoperability could become extremely valuable over time. That's the broader thesis behind XRP optimism, not blind hype. Infrastructure transformation. Now, maybe Ripple becomes a major player in future finance. Maybe competitors dominate instead. Maybe governments build completely separate systems. Nobody knows for certain. But one thing feels increasingly undeniable now. The world of finance is changing rapidly. Digital systems are expanding. Institutions are integrating blockchain technology. Tokenization conversations are accelerating globally. And investors like Cathie would continue emphasizing that disruptive innovation may reshape entire industries much faster than traditional markets expect. That alone is why XRP continues remaining one of the most emotionally discussed digital assets in the world today.